back to Capital City Sunday. I'm joined now by Lisa Subeck. She is the head of the Progressive Group United Wisconsin. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I know that there are a couple of issues that are on your plate that you guys are looking towards the fall and saying these need to be addressed. One of those is redistricting reform. There's been a bill that was introduced earlier this year by Diane Hesselbein of Middleton. I know she was one of the sponsors on it. Let's talk a little bit about your frustration, and I know a lot of frustration from the Democratic Party about the fact that there hasn't even been a public hearing set on this bill, which would essentially say an independent group should be in charge of redistricting in Wisconsin.
Sure. So the bill in question would actually put redistricting, the redrawing of the lines that define our legislative districts into the hands of the Legislative Reference Bureau, which is a nonpartisan body of folks who would essentially draw the maps for the legislature. There are about, I think, 16 other states that use some sort of independent authority. This is very similar to what's called the Iowa model.
Right, Iowa is the one
yes.
that's kind of been thrown out there. Tim Cullen, I know, has been proponent of that. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, what we saw in this past redistricting was millions of dollars spent on lawsuits and a highly partisan, highly secretive process. And what this bill would do is it would take that out of the partisan realm. It would take it away from the folks who might be trying to protect their incumbency, their elected position, and instead put it in the hands of this nonpartisan, impartial body. And this bill's been introduced. It has been sitting stalled and waiting for a public hearing. And quite frankly, Republicans who are in control right now don't want to give it the public hearing it deserves.
Talk a little bit about, you know, if this is something that the Democrats are now saying should be done, because, you know, I have to say there was a source who told me that in 2009 there was a similar bill put forth and the Democrats left it on the table at that time. I mean, they're kind of guilty in this too, aren't they?
Absolutely. You know, as an independent group, we really look to good government issues. And how we do redistricting is about good government. It's not about one party or the other. And what has typically happened over the years is that redistricting bills that look to take this out of partisan hands, as this bill does, get introduced usually by the minority party and sit stalled in the hands of the majority party. I often joke that what we need is 2 years out from redistricting, we need split control. Because then folks will get nervous and think,
sure,
okay, now's the time to do it.
Right.
But if they give this a public hearing, I think what people in both parties would find is that this is incredibly popular among the electorate, that we want fair elections and we want these boundaries drawn fairly.
That was the one thing I was going to say, is this is one of those bills, and there's a lot of these bills that come through the legislature, where I would say if you put it to the public just on a poll, 75% would say do it this way. Yet at the same time, I think both sides are so unwilling to give an inch on this that's why you're seeing this stagnation.
Right, and certainly this is a characteristic that we see in many decisions that are made. We see it when we talk contribution limits to candidates. Right. Incumbents want to protect their incumbency. And what we elect them to do is to protect our interests. So we are putting pressure on them, as are many other groups and many other individuals out there, to hold a hearing on this bill, hear what the people have to say, and to be accountable to the people.
I know that these election reform bills that I just talked about with Robin Vos, that Senator Mary Lozick has introduced, are giving you some heartburn. And some of them, I know that Robin Vos, his opinion is that these are not voter suppression bills. I'm sure that at least 3 of them you would disagree on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, we look at this package of bills introduced by Mary Lozick, and actually you couple it with a package of 3 additional bills introduced by Senator Glenn Grothman, you know, just a month or so before that, on top of voter ID and on top of a number of other bills. And what we see is a pattern of making it harder for people to vote and making it harder for people's votes to count. And I think one of the things that I find most alarming in Lozick's bills are a number of provisions that increase the use of a process called drawdown. And drawdown is a process.
Explain that, because that is language that's in the bill that I think a lot of people would read and they'd glaze over because they don't understand.
Absolutely. People would glaze over it seeing the language, but they'll be appalled when they hear what it means. Drawdown is a process by which at some point during the election, either during a recount or during the initial count of votes, it is determined that a vote was invalid. But you don't know which vote is invalid. So for example, during a recount, they discover that somebody didn't sign the poll book. There was a clerical error, somebody missed signing the poll book. They say, okay, we can't count their vote. But certainly because we have secret ballots, and rightfully so.
And that's what somebody brought up to me, is that how are they going to know who didn't sign the poll book because, you know, you're not required to put your name on your ballot.
Absolutely. They know who didn't sign the poll book, but they don't know which vote is theirs. So they randomly choose a ballot and destroy it. And that's horrific. I mean, I think that, you know, if there's just at the very base, core of elections and electoral values, every voter wants to know that their vote counts. We all say every vote counts. We want everybody to vote. We want people to have their voices heard. It is core to our democracy. But if you go in there, do everything right, cast your vote, and somebody else forgot to sign the poll book or filled out their registration form wrong, your vote just might not count under Lazik's bill.
And there's also a bill, we talked about this with Representative Voss as well, that on an absentee ballot form, if you forget to have a witness sign it, and somebody didn't, and I'm going to guess there's a decent amount of absentee ballots that have this. I don't know that it's because of fraud. I'm assuming most of them are because people simply don't remember to do it. They're automatically discounted. And do you feel like there should at least be a process there where you try to confirm this person was legitimately trying to vote?
Yeah, and worse, it's not just if a witness doesn't sign it, it's if the witness signs it but doesn't include their address.
Right, right.
And, you know, to me, that's a fairly minor clerical error, and it could pretty easily be confirmed with that voter who has included their information on the envelope that goes along with that ballot. There should be an effort to confirm. There should be an effort to count every vote. And truly, I can't fathom how forgetting to fill in the witness's address would equate to fraud. It just doesn't add up.
And we talk about secrecy of the ballot. There is another bill, and correct me if I'm wrong on how I read this bill, but it seems that if you have a damaged ballot and you get a duplicate ballot, when you fill that ballot out, you have to put your name on that ballot, correct? So
that's part of one of Lazik's bills.
Yeah, and at that point, that no longer is a secret ballot.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would be very uncomfortable, and I've worked as a poll worker. I'd be uncomfortable asking people, oh, but wait, you have to put your name on this. In the same way that I'd be very uncomfortable putting my name on a ballot because it didn't go through the machine right, and now anybody who's involved in the recount or the canvass of those ballots could see how I voted or could see how you voted. And, you know, I think that fair elections are just at the core of keeping our state and our country running, and that's what people expect. And these bills do not work to improve fair elections. They work to count less votes. They work to make it harder for people to vote. They put extra barriers in the way. You know, we see countries like Australia where everyone's required to vote, and we are going in the opposite direction.
Do you feel that, you know, there is any fraud out there? Because that's the argument, is that we don't know how much there is. There could be a few cases, there could be more than that. In your estimation, based on what you've heard, do you feel like there's any fraud?
Well, I can tell you that there have been less than 24 cases of fraud prosecuted in the last decade, in the last 10 years. So that's pretty minute.
Well, what about the argument Robin Voss makes, which is that prosecutors don't have the time to go after a crime like that?
You know, we have seen prosecutors go after crimes like that. We've certainly seen Attorney General Van Hollen create a task force in order to go after those crimes. So I think that's a false argument. And I would say all of us want fair elections. All of us want to eliminate fraud. All of us want ballots counted fairly. This is a solution in search of a problem. We don't have a large problem with fraud, and certainly the measures that we're looking at here, if we did have a problem with fraud, don't address it. If we did have a problem with fraud, it wouldn't be because a witness's address was left off the back of an absentee ballot envelope.
You know, given what Robin Voss said today and that he's going to be in support of these measures, they're probably going to get through the legislature at the very least. We don't know what the governor thinks of them yet, but if these were to go through, would you expect more lawsuits filed to stop them?
I think potentially there could be lawsuits on many of these. I mean, when you think about some of the procedures that are included in them, that potential is there. It's hard to say at this point, and I'm not an attorney,
Sure.
so you know, but I would expect that there would be lawsuits, much like there have been with voter ID and other actions taken in order to suppress the vote. I think most importantly here, it's really sad that we are looking at moving bills forward, so bills supported by the majority leader. He's going to move these that work to suppress the vote, and at the same time, we won't even have a hearing on a bill that looks to a more fair, more impartial redistricting system.
Do you feel like that is dead, or do you feel like if there's more pressure from people, there could still be a hearing on that bill, on that redistricting bill?
I never say never. So certainly we will continue to put pressure on, as will many other individuals and organizations out there, in hopes that we get a hearing on this bill. It's the right thing to do. And I hope that Robin Voss and others in the legislature will see that it's the right thing to do and move forward. I would say it's unlikely, though.
Do you feel that there is any possibility that a conservative group could see the benefit of that too, or have you talked to conservatives that do see the benefit of it?
Certainly, I've talked to mainstream, everyday conservatives who see the benefit of it. When you talk to people out in the communities across Wisconsin, they support an impartial redistricting bill. You know, they support this being done more fairly. They support ensuring that this is a nonpartisan driven process. As far as conservatives in the legislature, we haven't seen any jump on board yet, but I think that we could at some point.
All right. Lisa Subeck, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.